Good morning, and welcome to Sustainability Reporting and Disclosure, Introduction to SASB, presented by Sustainability Accounting Standards Board and GoBe. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Ashley Douchus, and I am the Director of Professional Services at GoBe, managing the development and implementation of GoBe's professional service offerings, including energy engineering, LEED certifications, WELL, SASB, GRESB, and corporate sustainability strategy programs. The session today will be recorded and sent to all participants on today's call. You are welcome to share the session with anyone whom you feel may benefit. Today's session will run about 45 minutes in length, and we've left time at the end of the presentation for questions. I invite everyone to use the chat feature to submit any questions during the presentation. Now I'd like to introduce you to our speakers for today's webcast, Helee Lev and Bryan Esterly. Helee Lev, Executive Vice President of GoBe, helps clients analyze their portfolio needs from an operational efficiency standpoint and works with the GoBe team to implement an ESG strategy through GoBe's consulting services and software. Bryan Esterly leads standards development for the infrastructure sector at the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, also known as SASB. His role includes research and collaboration with industry and investors to drive the standardization of financially material sustainability information in corporate reporting. He also works with the investment community to advance the integration of material ESG factors into investment analysis. Now I'd like to welcome Helee and Bryan. Bryan will be starting.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ashley. Once again, my name is Bryan Esterly, and I'm with the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or SASB for short. First off, I would like to extend a thank you to GoBe for hosting this webinar today. GoBe is a SASB advisory partner, and serving in that role, we decided that it made sense to offer this webinar as an introduction to SASB. We have a couple of objectives. First off, to offer this introduction and a high-level overview of SASB and the SASB standards. And additionally, we will work to tailor some of the content at several points throughout the webinar to the commercial real estate industry. So with that said, let's jump right into it. To start off, I'd like to provide a view of the overall sustainability disclosure landscape right now. I want to be clear that this slide is not meant to communicate companies' engagement or performance with ESG or sustainability issues, nor is it meant to get at investors' interest. It's merely meant to communicate that there's a lack of a common language that companies and investors use to communicate with one another on material sustainability performance. And unsurprisingly, an effect of that is that there's a lot of overall market confusion. The capital markets are not efficiently processing sustainability information. Investors are not able to clearly articulate their demands for data or their use of data, while companies often struggle to communicate how they're actually performing and engaging and investing on sustainability issues and how that's actually quantitatively affecting the company's sustainability performance. And so once again, the message here is that there's no common language. An analogy would be early in the 20th century, there was no common language for financial accounting. Along came FASB and of course GAAP, and it developed this common language for companies and investors to communicate through financial accounting standards. To look at this issue specifically in the real estate industry, I'm going to bring up a recent research report by Morgan Stanley called Bricks, Mortar, and Carbon. And the point of this is that there's an increasing amount of investor recognition that there are missed and growing opportunities in terms of sustainability among companies, especially financially material sustainability issues. Many of you may be familiar with this research report. It found that in the top 10 U.S. office markets alone, there was an opportunity for $35 billion in increased asset values, driven by opportunities for building expense reductions between 3 and 30% on average, which could then lead to improved occupancy rates and rent premiums. I don't think that this overall concept should be new to anybody that's attending the webinar. I'm sure many of you understand these issues much more deeply than I do or than SASB does. But the point here is that investors are increasingly recognizing the materiality, the importance, the financial importance of how companies perform on sustainability and how they're investing in sustainability. And in order to get to that next step, to really capitalize on these opportunities, like what we're seeing here today for building expense reductions, which, by the way, are largely driven by, by the increasing services and technology. For example, much of the work that GoBe does. These opportunities are going to be continue to increase, and there needs to be a common standardized language for these two parties in the capital markets to connect. I'm just going to take a quick moment to look at this issue a little more deeply from the investor's perspective. This was a PricewaterhouseCoopers survey that polled institutional investors, and it reaffirmed this theme, this message that a common language in terms of sustainability performance is lacking. Looking at the data point furthest on the left, over 80% of investors stated that they're dissatisfied with how risks and opportunities are identified and quantified in financial terms. Nearly 80% stated that they were dissatisfied with the comparability of sustainability reporting between companies in the same industry. Just touching on one other data point, the second from the right, specifically in terms of key performance indicators related to each identified material issue, nearly 70% of investors, once again, said that they are dissatisfied. Again, this doesn't relate to how companies are actually performing or actually engaging or investing in sustainability. It merely relates to investors' ability to understand how companies are performing on these material sustainability issues. I'm going to spend a moment on this slide here because I think this is really important. This comes from SASB data. We invest a lot of time and resources into analysis of the current corporate disclosure landscape. So what we're looking at here are 10K disclosures across the topics that the SASB standards have identified across all 11 sectors or 79 industries falling under those 11 sectors. So if we look at all of those issues, those material sustainability issues that the SASB standards have identified, there is already corporate disclosure in the 10K on 75% of these topics. This says two things. First, it reaffirms the importance of the topics that the SASB standards have identified in terms of their materiality. They're already being disclosed on in corporate 10Ks, so they're already being recognized by management as significant and important or material issues. The second thing that this says is, well, what's the problem here? If there's already disclosure 75% of the time on these topics. So the answer is that in looking at the two lightest shades in the middle of each of these bars, the one on the left, the light red shade, is when this disclosure is boilerplate in nature. So it's it's qualitative, it's highly general, and it lacks any decision usefulness. The lighter shade of gray is when there's a bit more industry specificity, but metrics are generally lacking, and it still generally lacks any level of decision usefulness for investors. Moving over to the darkest shade of gray on the right, we found that, once again, of these SASB topics identified in the standards, metrics are communicated by companies only about 13% of the time. And even when they are communicated, they are generally not done in standardized ways, which just indicates that the usefulness to investors is even further limited. A quick aside is that the real estate industry is one of 8 industries within the infrastructure sector at the top. In turning to look at this issue from what we believe is a very common corporate perspective, I want to make it clear that SASB is acutely aware of this environment, the overall context around sustainability reporting that we've stepped into. We are painfully aware of the amount of effort and company resources that goes into sustainability reporting. We talk with companies that literally submit hundreds and hundreds of ESG, or they at least receive hundreds of ESG survey requests or data validation requests from investors, from third-party ratings companies, and from other stakeholders. And so we recognize that, well, one, this communicates again that there's a demand for this information. It also states that companies need a more effective tool to communicate their performance rather than just doing it again and again on a one-off basis, potentially offering a tool, a common language, or the SASB standards as a solution to this demand for information that, that companies are regularly facing. And this is what SASB views as our role in the corporate disclosure landscape, establishing this common language for companies to publicly disclose their sustainability performance on material sustainability issues to investors using quantitative metrics, aligning with other initiatives that are already out there, and really allowing companies to focus their resources on the minimum set of sustainability information that investors are interested in, and likewise allowing investors to really focus on this minimum set of information instead of both parties speaking multiple languages at the same time. We think that this will add to the decision usefulness, it will add to cost effectiveness of disclosures, and help with the capital markets in overall processing sustainability performance. That brings up SASB overall as an organization. SASB is an independent 501c3 nonprofit, and I'm going to keep moving through this slide. We've already talked about the mission overall, but once again, essentially to help public corporations disclose material, decision-useful information to investors. I'll touch on a few other points in just a moment here. I'm not going to spend much time on our leadership, but this slide provides our board of directors, and I don't think the point of this slide is to communicate our leadership as much as it is to communicate that this vision for a common language around communicating sustainability performance is backed by some of the biggest names in the U.S. capital markets. Michael Bloomberg is our chair, Mary Shapiro is our vice chair, a couple other SEC former chairs or commissioners, Bob Hertz, the former chairman of the FASB, and so forth. Individuals that are backing this vision and this market need for sustainability accounting standards. So the question at this point is, where exactly does SASB fit into the overall disclosure landscape? And I want to be clear right off the bat that the various axes on this chart do not in any way imply better or worse or anything to that extent. It's just to help articulate differences. So first and foremost, SASB is fundamentally different than other organizations in this general space because we develop accounting standards. We do not do ratings or certifications or analysis. We provide accounting standards that are publicly available and free for the market to use. The analogous example, of course, is GAAP in terms of financial accounting standards. We believe that this information should be publicly disclosed and that the sustainability accounting standards are focused on material sustainability issues. To talk about this, I will move to the next slide. And the bottom half here is the definition of materiality that the SASB standards used. And that definition is seamlessly aligned with the definition that was established by the U.S. Supreme Court and thus used by the SEC and is used in regulatory filings, the 10K. Secondly, this slide is also meant to indicate that up here on the upper right, the SASB standards are not a disclosure process in and of themselves. They are meant to be an input into existing corporate disclosure processes. That once again is fundamentally different in that we're not stating that there needs to be a new or different type of materiality analysis. It's the same type of 10K materiality analysis that is already conducted by companies for their 10K reporting. I'm going to touch just very, very briefly on the process that we've used to develop the provisional standards. There's an independent process for all industries, all 79 industries, running at a minimum a year in length. It was highly iterative in nature, that was highly dependent on industry and investor input. The ultimate result of the output, the provisional standards, is if we look across all 79 provisional standards that are now available as of about 2.5 months ago, there's an average of only 5 sustainability topics and 13 accounting metrics per industry. I think the point in that is that once again, we strive to focus on the minimum set of sustainability issues that are most likely to be material at the industry level. So this communicates what the standards are themselves a bit more. There's 3 different parts. There is the disclosure topic or the sustainability issue. Then there are the accounting metrics, which are meant to communicate how the company is performing on that sustainability issue. And for every single accounting metric, there's technical guidance or the technical protocol meant to standardize how that accounting metric is calculated. This is an example of this evolution of corporate reporting, specifically in the 10K, where, excuse me, where on the far left we have what would widely be considered more of a, just very generally speaking, a boilerplate disclosure in nature, in that we can read through about how climate change may impact the business, potentially increasing the cost of energy at our properties. It lacks any level of usefulness, and it's very, very broad. Another disclosure in the middle creates a bit more of industry specificity in explaining an issue. And if you notice at the bottom in bold, it even communicates a metric, that there are 4 properties in this portfolio that have received the Energy Star label. So a really interesting disclosure, but not necessarily standardized across an industry, and likely a bit challenging for an investor to really make use of that information when they're lacking anything that even remotely resembles a complete data set. So over on the far right, we have the SASB metrics specifically for this one issue within the real estate standards. This slide is really just meant to communicate the vision in a different way, and that any investor, any stakeholder for that matter, should be able to eventually punch in the ticker for any company and pull up their sustainability performance on these accounting metrics and benchmark performance, track it over the time, and use it in investment analysis. I understand this is likely to be a topic of interest to many participants, and this speaks directly to what is, I think, really accurately widely viewed as a really successful industry initiative, the GRESB survey, of course. And this speaks to how SASB strives to not create metrics from scratch. Every single industry that we develop standards for, we strive to understand any existing industry-specific initiatives and align with them as much as possible. I think the real estate industry is uniquely positioned to be in a relatively much more advanced stage than many other industries that we look at. And I think that that is largely a result of a lot of the great work that many of you do that are listening to this webinar this afternoon. It's also largely thanks to GRESB and the GRESB survey. So to communicate a bit more clearly how the SASB real estate standards are aligned with the GRESB survey, I have this pie chart in the middle which says that of the SASB real estate standards, there are 10 quantitative metrics and 4 discussion and analysis metrics, which are really a structured discussion for management to provide commentary on strategy and to provide supporting context. Looking at the quantitative metrics within the SASB real estate standards, over on the right-hand side, 60% of the quantitative data points are fully aligned with the GRESB survey. So if a company is already a participant in the GRESB survey, they will already have at minimum 60% of the data points required by the SASB standards. Taking that another step further, another 15% of the data points required by the SASB standards are at least partially aligned with the GRESB survey. And then very significantly, I think at the bottom, of the remaining 25% of data points, if a company is already participating in the GRESB survey, they will already have that data available. In other words, there's no further need for additional data collection. It's only analysis of existing data. That does not apply to companies that are not GRESB participants. That's specific to GRESB participants. And so the point here is that at a very minimum, at least 75% of the SASB standards are very well aligned with the GRESB survey, likely even higher than that. I just want to touch on this very briefly. It's a slide I could spend a lot of time on, but I'm just going to mention it really quickly here. I think a logical question at this point is to ask if this process is working. And this is a study out of Harvard Business School that analyzed company performance, and it separated how they're performing on material sustainability issues versus immaterial sustainability issues. And it found that companies that perform very well on material issues but poorly on immaterial issues perform the best in terms of both equity returns and accounting returns. So the point here is to communicate with a clear data point, clear evidence that the capital markets are not processing the sustainability information very well. This result would not be the case, would not be what it is if the markets were operating efficiently, and I believe this speaks to or further reaffirms the need for, one, that this process is working and really directing investor focus on material issues, and two, that the markets are broken down in processing this information. Just very briefly, SASB is at a pivotal point right now where we're much more turning to a much more market-facing position. We've now developed industry-specific standards for all 79 industries, and we're launching into an implementation review or a consultation period with industry and investors. Anyone that's interested in participating, which could include something as simple as providing feedback on the SASB standards, I would highly encourage you to get in touch with SASB. SASB has a lot of tools and resources available on our website. Here are a few of them. I'm going to touch on one of them very briefly here, which I think is most relevant to the attendees this afternoon the implementation guide. Just like the SASB standards, this is free and publicly available, and it walks through the implementation process for integrating or implementing the SASB standards into the 10K. Lastly, just very briefly, we think education overall needs to advance and in more of a formalized way in this space. And SASB also has an educational program called the Fundamentals of Sustainability Accounting. And that is all from me. So with that said, I think we'll turn it over to Helee.
All right, great. Thank you. Excellent information. I think I learned something new every time I heard you practice that or repeat that. So good stuff. Thanks, Brian. All right, well, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're dialing in from. And thank you again so much to everyone that's taken time out of your busy schedules and days to learn a little bit more about SASB. We're very excited at GoBe to announce our latest and greatest partnership with SASB, and just want to walk you through a little bit about how we chose to align ourselves with SASB and why, and how some of these things that these concepts that Brian talked about might be implemented in practice. So for those of you folks that know about GoBe, apologies for the repetition. For those that have not yet been acquainted with GoBe, we were really born out of founders that came from the best-in-class companies within their respective disciplines. So software, management strategy consulting, and commercial real estate. The company GoBe was named after the Gobi fish, lives in the ocean, creates symbiotic relationships with other creatures, and creates a sustainable built environment that our co-founders sought to replicate in the commercial real estate environment. Hence the name GoBe and the name of our software, C-Suite, which is, of course, a play off of the Gobi fish. We're very proud to announce that as of last December, we closed a round of Series A funding, $5 million, with a Toronto-based VC, which has enabled us to invest money not only in our products, but in strategic partnerships like the one with SASB. And a few other accolades and partnerships that we're certainly proud of, that we've worked hard to earn. We're Energy Star Sustaining Partner this year, as recognized by the US EPA for our ongoing excellence in quantity and quality with the Energy Star program. We were the original GRESB data partner and continue to foster a great relationship with GRESB, and about to submit GRESB on behalf of roughly 1,600 assets at the end of this month. Deadline I'm sure many of you on the phone are all too familiar with. And certainly proud to be a lead proven provider, as recognized by the USGBC, is just a handful of providers in the world, again, based on quality, quantity, and our process. So again, thank you to the existing clients that have joined the call. For those folks who may be new to GoBe, just certainly know you're in good company. We're a Chicago-based company, but certainly have nationwide and international reach. We have a respectable footprint in Canada, have recently taken on our first accounts in Asia and Europe, so truly a global company, local company with global reach, because we're still pretty down-to-earth, kind Chicago, good Midwest folks. So GoBe, we're the creators of C-Suite, which is a smart platform for better run buildings. So I'll ask you on the phone, folks on the phone, to take a moment to just visualize how day-to-day operations work at your organization. More likely than not, and what we find, there are a handful or even a plethora of different types of systems, perhaps some Excel. There's multiple individuals doing different things that all kind of have to come together one way or another, be it for the 10K, be it for CSR reporting. So imagine for a moment if all of that were somehow centralized, consolidated, consistent. That's our vision too, right? And then to leverage all of this data. So big data is certainly a buzzword. I think the new buzzword I've heard now is small data. But it's about what are you doing with this, and what tools do you have that enable you to go to skip over the arduous process of collection and validation and go right into analytics, so that what you're doing, the time you're spending on this, is meaningful time that drives value for your business, drives your NOI, and improves what you're trying to accomplish, rather than manipulating the data itself. And I think this is an image that tends to resonate with a lot of the folks that we work with, in that data lives in silos, right? So again, be it the R drive or the Excel spreadsheet on Brian's computer, or 17 different systems that are essentially collecting the same piece of data. So think of a utility bill, the data that comes off a utility bill. That information is needed for so many different outputs. be it energy usage, cost, budgeting. But oftentimes, because of these disparate systems, you're collecting that same piece of data multiple times. So you're paying for that redundancy. You then have to reconcile with what company A collected to company B. So imagine, again, a world where all this information was consolidated into one system, and then the output on the other end is always, as long as you have the information, it doesn't matter if it's now SASB or GRESB or whatever it is on the back end, as long as you have a methodology to collect this information, validate it, and maintain that on an ongoing basis. So I'll take a moment to explain why did we at GoBe choose to align ourselves with SASB. So to date, sustainability hasn't really been quantified. It's been a bit of a free-for-all in that reporting, it's not standardized. To Brian's point, there hasn't been a common language that really translates what folks are trying to do. And now, if the sustainability metrics and data is going to be tied in with your financials, this is really the future of sustainability, in that it's going to need to be accurate, validated, and consistent across the board. So think of other areas and industries, or even examples where numbers and metrics being accurate are so important. So in this example of a rocket ship, as a rocket ship enters the atmosphere or leaves the atmosphere, it has to be at a very precise angle or the ship can explode midair, right? So just a miscalculation or an inaccuracy in a number could be the difference with a rocket ship returning safely to Earth or not. So maybe a bit dramatic in that I don't think any of the built assets are going to explode. But then again, if this is metrics and information that are going to be filed with a company's 10K and they're falsified or there's any sort of malfeasance assumed, it can be, someone can go to jail. So that could be the equivalent of perhaps a rocket exploding. Or in the next example, so think of something like an election. It's a bajillion data points that need to be aggregated consistently. They need to be rolled up. It needs to be accurate. And if it's not, it can affect the entire outcome of an election. Or certainly for my Canadian friends on the line, think of something as simple as hockey stats. So if I'm going to aggregate data based on players and statistics and what they do, there has to be a common language as to how people are evaluating players, how people are calculating those statistics. Otherwise, you're going to rank the players inaccurately. So we truly believe that this type of thing, getting this common language, is the future of sustainability as the industry moves from sort of, it's been called its awkward adolescence, as it's not a brand new emerging industry, but it's not yet a mature industry. But as it transitions and moves to maturity, having this common language and this validated data that SASB is going to help provide is really, really important. So take in CSR 10K reporting the example of water efficiency. So you have large soda company A versus large soda company B. And everyone wants to brag about how they're saving water in this water-intensive process that is bottling and distributing and making soda. So company A is going to report, on their website that perhaps they use 293.3 billion liters of water and they've reduced it by this much, and that's the way that their calculations go. And then soda company B kind of does a similar thing, but they're going to show it, graphically represented a little bit differently. So it's very hard to say, like, who can know? Is soda company A more responsible, or is soda company B? And then, of course, with these, the way that soda company B reports, there's all these fine print disclaimers of, well, here's the ratio that we used, and the calculation was based on this and this, but not this. So it's really hard to even compare the two because, again, there's no common language. So what SASB is going to do is they're going to give you the exact way that soda company, so say in the scenario of soda company A and soda company B, it's going to say, this is exactly how you're going to calculate your water consumption. This is exactly the way you're going to measure it. And for example, these are the units you're going to use. So this particular example isn't around water. It is around energy. So one of the units that SASB puts out is a gigajoule, which I thought was funny because I hadn't heard of that since maybe 7th grade chemistry. So then you're sitting there saying, well, what the heck is a gigajoule, and how am I going to convert gigajoules? So you need a partner and a system to help you with that. So what we at GoBe are doing now is taking our technology C-suite, It's going to be approved by SASB in that it's a system where it's in aligning with SASB metrics, the way that SASB does the calculation, so that you know if your properties, your portfolio, your buildings are in C-suite, it's already SASB approved, so you don't have to worry, and you know that your metrics are going to be calculated just the way that they're supposed to. So GoBe clients will take the process from the whole life cycle, from the bill acquisition, the data acquisition, the validation, the hard to get data in the scenario of triple net leases. We aggregate it all together, validate it, can look at things like the energy procurement strategy, work with the utility directly to resolve any errors or tariff discrepancies, and then your output is just good, clean data. And if you look on the right-hand side, all we're trying to do, the left-hand side is not going to change because, again, it's all about collecting good quality data and validating it, right? And then the output is just slightly different. So Energy Star wants to see it a little bit different than GRESB, which wants to see a little bit different than LEED or Dynamic Plaque or Carbon Disclosure Project. So on the right side, we'll forever be adding functionality so that all these systems can be accommodated, but the left side shouldn't change, right? It's all just about moving that same piece of data around and perhaps tweaking it or getting a couple additional data points. And the point that Brian made earlier that I want to strongly reiterate, since a lot of folks are already invested in GRESB and doing GRESB, there's a 75% overlap. So you're already, you know, a good 3/4 of the way there if you're doing GRESB with SASB. So the rest is really not that difficult and shouldn't be arduous at all. And that's sort of the differentiator. So I know I spoke with someone last night. It's just like, how do you get through all the noise? There's so many providers out there that promise to do this, that, and the next. So the only thought that I'll leave you with is where we really come in and make a difference is with this data acquisition and validation piece. So it's garbage in, garbage out, and that's the bottom line. If the way that the data is being collected from the get-go, validated, is not good, then the output's not going to be good. You're not going to score well in GRESB. You're not going to report accurately in your 10K. It all starts with the beginning and the data acquisition process, and that is certainly where we're a bit different. So. In thinking about SASB and that it's relatively new, I like this image because take a minute to think about where you feel that your organization is. So is your organization, are they true innovators? Are they the cutting edge or bleeding edge where SASB comes out and they say, I'm going to be the first one to do this. I want to pilot it. I want to be, you know, provide feedback and help it evolve. Or are you going to wait till like maybe a couple of people do it, your peers do it, and they say, all right, well, this is actually a really good thing, and now it's somewhat baked and fully vetted out, and you should try it, so you're in that early adopter phase? Or is it when everybody's doing it, you know, you're the early majority? Or do you feel like you're the organization that's always playing catch up, where you're like, oh, geez, everyone's done this, everyone's done this GRESB thing, we got to catch up, what is it, we don't know, we're getting pressure. So think about where you want to be, and if you want to be playing catch up, or if you want to be a leader, or if you're fine just being somewhere in between. I mean, there's certainly nothing wrong with wanting to have the industry and the market kind of validate it before getting on. So the point is that I don't think this is bleeding edge anymore or even cutting edge. This is happening. This is a concept that you're going to be hearing more and more about. So now is a great time, you know, to think about getting on the bandwagon and trying it out. And so then just again, last thought on GoBe and better run buildings and what we do. So just over 750 million square feet, 21,000 utility bills processed a month. I like this stat. I won't read them all to you. I think everyone can read, but 28,600 hours of property management teams' time saved. And that's the thing, you know, time is worth money. So if you have property managers that are responsible for collecting data at their building, their methodology is different from property manager A to B to C, you can't expect to get good roll-up data that's going to really represent your company now, not only in CSR and GRESB, but in accounting and financials in your 10K, which becomes, you know, a much more serious endeavor. So with that, I think we're ready to go to Q&A. So hopefully we've explained everything well, that there's a couple lingering questions perhaps, but you're leaving this session with a better knowledge and understanding of SASB. And certainly for the folks that are already GoBe clients to know that this is well underway, taken care of, handled, and integrated into C-suite for you.
Thank you, Brian and Helee. Yes, now we will go into Q&A. Our first question, I would be interested in learning which companies in the real estate sector are using or considering SASB, especially interested in residential builders and developers.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the question. So first off, the SASB provisional standards were released about 2.5 months ago. So they're really, really recent still. With that said, I think there's been a lot of industry interest and engagement in starting to move down the road of implementing the standards. It should come as no surprise to anyone that's familiar with the corporate reporting landscape that especially 10K reporting specifically is a very conservative space, and rightly so. I think the natural result of that is that there will be a pathway to getting there into the 10K, and we're already seeing a lot of the early indicators that there's a lot of interest in implementation and adoption. Those could include things like as something as simple as SASB being referenced or included in a sustainability report. Another indicator is we recently did a webinar with an organization, Financial Executives International. I think we've done 2, and this one was a couple months ago. And of the participants, who largely include CFOs, over half of the companies that participated, or CFOs, stated that their company was beginning to take steps to move towards implementing the SASB standards. So once again, really, relatively speaking, recent stuff, but very exciting early indicators, I think especially in the real estate industry. And I think that once again, that largely speaks to all the success and accomplishments that this industry specifically has had. Once again, just going back and looking at GRES. So thanks for the question.
Great, thank you. Next question, what is the timing to roll out SASB?
So as I've said, all 79 industry-specific provisional standards are now available. The infrastructure sector, which included the real estate industry, once again, it was the very last sector that was released about 2.5 months ago. And beginning in 2017, the standards will go through a codification process. And so I'd invite anyone to participate in that process, visiting our website, reaching out and connecting with me. I'm now realizing that there's a couple interpretations to that question, and if Helee wants to comment on that at all, it's kind of hard to tell exactly what the context is here.
Yeah, absolutely. And seeing the individual that the question came from, I think it can be kind of case by case, depending on where the overall strategy is at and what you're trying to accomplish this year versus next year. So it's something that I might request to take offline with that particular individual, because I do think it's unique, right? Everybody has a different sustainability and reporting journey, and everybody's at a different place in it. So I think it's the timing kind of coincides with other initiatives that the organization has underway.
Great. And final question, unless we can get through it quickly, but where can I include SASB metrics, for example, an annual report or a CSR report?
Yeah, it's a great question. And unfortunately, I am not going to give you a definitive answer. And that once again relates to how SASB is creating these industry-specific standards as a form of a public good. And the standards, once again, are not a disclosure process in and of themselves. They can be used as an input to existing disclosure frameworks, disclosure processes, regulatory filings, and SASB does not say what the precise, correct way and what any wrong ways to use the standards might be. The messaging around how the standards are fundamentally designed for the 10K largely speaks to how they're built to a robust enough level to warrant inclusion in a 10K. Now, with that being said, once again, they're standards that can be used as an input to companies, any company's reporting process or disclosure process or communication materials that they would like.
Thank you, Brian. And I think we're going to try to fit in one final question. Is SASB a global standard, or will it just affect U.S. investment managers?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that SASB receives all the time. There's a lot of overseas excitement on establishing this common language once again. So the SASB standards are at their core designed for the U.S. capital markets, but all that really means is that we're using the U.S. definition of materiality. So once again, the SEC's definition of materiality. So with that being said, the content of the standards themselves is really applicable anywhere around the world. And so we're unsurprisingly seeing a lot of excitement and a lot of engagement, specifically out of the European market. And I think there will be more to follow in terms of more specificity of how the SASB standards apply to the overseas markets. But where they stand right now, they are at their core designed for the U.S. capital markets.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian and Helee, for sharing all of your knowledge with us today. If you should have any additional questions, please feel free to email info@gobeinc.com. And thank you again to Helee and Brian.